What is going on, everybody? My name is Tatro here for ADSR, and today we're working in partnership with Serato to show you how to make a lo-fi beat in Serato Studio. Now, if you want to follow along with this tutorial or you just like the workflow that you see here, you can download a free version of Serato Studio by clicking the link down below. Like I said, we're going to be making a lo-fi chill beat, and we're going to be starting from the ground up today. So the first screen we see when we boot up Serato Studio is this. It's asking us if we want to create a new beat or a new remix, and then we also have some templates. For now, we're actually just going to use a completely blank canvas, and we're going to select new beat. So by default, Serato Studio actually loads us with a clean 808 drum kit. That is our first deck. And to hear the sounds within this drum kit, we can click on each individual sound. Serato Studio also makes it really easy if you just have a laptop keyboard. We can use the number row to play each of the samples in our drum kit, and you can see that they're labeled with the numbers there. We can also use home row on the keyboard. And of course, we can use a MIDI controller. But like I said at the top, we're making a lo-fi chill beat, and this clean 808 drum kit is not actually the drum kit we probably want to use. Now, there's lots of different styles in lo-fi chill beat music, but I usually associate it with some type of acoustic sounding drums. They border on acoustic and electronic. So I'm going to go from our library here and select drums, and we're going to look at some of the drum kits that come in Serato Studio. Now, a boom bap drum kit is actually probably what we're looking for here. So I'm going to go and click this drum kit and drag it right onto this deck that had the clean 808 in it, but now it has our boom bap drum kit in it as well. Before we go any further, I have to decide on the tempo of our track, because lo-fi chill music is usually pretty slow, and our BPM is currently set to 120, which if I turn on our metronome right here and I just press play, we hear that that's a pretty fast tempo, much faster than we want to go. So what I'll do is I'll hover over the BPM button here, and I'll tap the tempo. Just a very slow 4 beats, the tempo I think we should be playing at. And we land at about 67.54. We should just round that up to 70 probably. Now if we listen to our metronome, it's ticked on right here, and we press play. This seems like a much more appropriate tempo for lo-fi chill hop. Now we've got a couple options here for how we're going to record our first drum pattern. The first is we could finger drum it in. We could do that either on a MIDI keyboard or on our computer keyboard. We could also draw notes in. Now, as you can see here, we have a grid, and by clicking in one of those grids and pressing play, we're able to draw in our own notes. Now that's easy enough. We could go ahead and draw in our notes. We could even adjust our grid size for specific instruments so we can get a faster pattern here. And let's go back and plug those snares in again. That's not necessarily a lo-fi hip hop feel, so we don't need to go that low with our magnification on the grid. I'm going to get rid of these notes I drew in. I'm going to go ahead and hit the record button, and it's actually going to count me in 4 beats, so I have some time to get ready. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And now we're looping. And Serato Studio is also doing a little bit of work for us in the background because quantization is turned on. So if I didn't play that drum pattern in perfectly, which I definitely didn't, it's working to fix all of these notes, to clean them up and snap them to the grid. And you'll notice that we recorded a single bar loop here. So it's just these notes that we see, and this number right here represents that bar size. Let's say we wanted to play in something a little bit longer and maybe slightly more complex with more variation in it. First, what I'll do is I'll clear that selection of notes. So now we have no drum pattern at all. And now I'll press this plus button, which will double the size of our loop here. So we have bar 1, 2, 3, 4, and now bar 2. You can see that that turned purple. So now we've got the ability to play in some drums. I'm going to press record again. It will count in 4 beats, and then we'll play in a new drum pattern here that will be 2 bars long. Let's try it. 1, 2, ready, go. And now it's looping back for us already. And one thing we've got to remember to do is turn off record. Now we've got a very basic drum pattern laid down. One thing we can also do with each deck that we continue to add is we have basic EQ functions and a filter, as well as volume control here. So we can adjust it in our mix. But one key thing when thinking about lo-fi chill hop is it's supposed to sound a little bit old, a little bit degraded, and usually some of those highs are rolled off. We could do this a couple ways. I could take these highs and just lower them. I might even choose to do it to some of the mids as well. I'm going to double click to put those back to normal. We could also use the filter and filter them out. Now, for me, I think this hi-hat is actually coming through a little bit strong, and we can adjust each of these drums individually. So for instance, we've got volume right here. I want that to settle in a little bit more, so I brought the volume down a bit. And say the pitch of a particular drum wasn't working, like maybe I want to adjust the pitch of that clap, I could key shift it. Let's put it up just 3 semitones. Maybe that'll sit a little better in the mix. If we want to add a little more humanization to it, or actually a little swing, we've got a swing knob right here at the top, which we can slowly pick up. And I like to put it at about 60%, which usually isn't too extreme, but just adds a little bit more feel. Here's without. Just much more steady and straight. And now that we've added our drums, let's go ahead and add our next instrument layer. And I like to add in some chords. And usually when I think of lo-fi hip hop, I think of like an electric piano. So let's go into instruments here in our library. This Azimuth synth sound sounds great. I'm going to go ahead and drag it into our decks. And we didn't lose our drums or anything here. Just notice that this is where we're going to keep all of the layers in our track. All of our decks go here. And if we want to go back to drums, we just have to click on it. But let's go back to the synth. Now, since we've only been working in rhythm, we haven't really done much with setting the key or anything of our track yet. I think staying in C minor is fine, but just know that you can adjust the root note of your track, and you can adjust whether in major or minor. Now, like I said, we want to do chords, but currently, if I use the number row, we only have single notes. Luckily, it has put them all in key for us, so we don't have to worry about playing the wrong note. If I did want to play chromatically, though, we could just switch off play in key. And now look, we can use our QWERTY keyboard, and we can play chromatically. Let's keep it in key for now. I did say I want to play chords, and we've got this great auto chord feature, which builds chords on each of the notes in the scale. This functions with our MIDI controller as well. It's also important to note that playing in key mode when using a MIDI controller makes it so you can't play wrong notes either. So if we're in C minor, I shouldn't really be able to play that E natural. It should be E flat, but notice how these two keys are the same sound, so it makes it that much easier for us. But as you can hear, now playing a single note creates a chord for us. So we can add complexity to those as well. So right now where I'm playing with 3 notes, a triad, that's our most basic version of a chord. But if I turn that number up to say 4, we add layers of complexity to our sound. And they all sound good in different contexts, right? But for now, I think I'm going to keep mine at 5. I think that sounds pretty good. Lo-fi chill hop is definitely known for sampling from old jazz, and jazz uses lots of extensions and tensions, which is what increasing this note number is doing to our chord. One more thing we should take a look at for the chord function is the feel knob. What this will actually do is you'll notice that at 0%, we're just playing all the notes simultaneously in the chord. As we start to turn this up, we get a bit of a strum function. The higher we turn that, the more spread out those notes will be. I'm going to keep mine at around 30%. I want a little bit of a strum, but not too much. Now I want to come up with a simple chord progression in pattern, and I'm going to keep it simple and play 2 chords. I'm going to start with the number 3 on my number pad here and go down to the number 1. And maybe catch that 4 on the way back up. But that idea I just came up with is a 4-bar pattern, not a 2-bar pattern like we already have. So I'm going to use the same process we did before, and I'm going to double it by pressing the plus sign. Now I don't have to go back and double my drums. It's already done the work for me. All I have to do now is layer on top my 4-bar chord pattern. All right, so now that we've got our 4 bars set up, same process as before, we'll hit the record button. It'll count us in 4 beats, and we can record in our chord pattern. Great. And it's still recording. We have to make sure we turn record off or else we'll end up overdubbing. And now we've got a chord progression to go with our drums. Like I mentioned before, lo-fi known for like the degraded lower quality sound, right? Lower fidelity. One way we can achieve that effect is same thing we did to the drums, is just by filtering out some of those highs. We can also add effects to our instruments. So I'm going to turn on the effects tab right up here. And now you'll see we get access to places to add our effects. Here on our drums, if we go back here, we can actually add effects to each individual one shot in our kit. On our instrument here, we actually have a set of preloaded effects. Let's hear what they sound like by turning it on. Let's turn on WUB modulated low pass filter. Which is pretty groovy. It's got a phaser on it as well and an echo. Those effects are kind of cool. They're not really my style though, so I'm going to turn them off. I might keep a little of the echo on because it makes it kind of dreamy. And I'm going to swap one of these effects out actually. So if I use the drop down menu here, I have the selection of all of our built-in effects. We have one called sidechain, and this is a stylistic thing. It's something I like to apply in my beats. It basically makes sure that all of your instruments are reacting and ducking under the kick drum. So if I pick hard sidechain and we start to turn that up, first let's play it with it off. Just very basic chords. Just playing at their own volume. Turn the sidechain on. With the sidechain on, we are hearing like a pumping sensation on our chord instrument. We're probably going to go through and add that to our other instruments as we go. Important to note that the same way we could draw in our drums on the grid, we can draw in notes on the grid as well. So if I turn off the auto chord function, we can now draw in single notes on our grid here. We can scan through our bars to figure out where we want to add a note. And maybe I want to add a note in here on bar 3. Cool. I like that note, but it's a little short. So if we go right towards the end of the note, it'll form a bracket and we can stretch it to be as long as the chord. And then we've got our chords. Pretty satisfied. I think the next step is to add a bass line. Before we add a bass line, one thing you might have noticed here is a blank section here. And this is where we're actually going to create our new scenes. Since we've already automatically created an intro scene, which we could rename if we want by right-clicking on it, we can also copy this scene and continue to add layers to it. So I click on intro, and it automatically allows me to copy into the next scene slot for scene 2. So from here, let's add an instrument. Now, we've been just going straight to the library, but of course there is an add instrument button, which loads up a blank instrument deck. And we can go ahead down to our instruments in our library now, go to bass. That one works for me. Very, very simple. I'm going to drop it on this new deck. And now we've got a bass. If you're stuck on bass lines, one of the simplest things you can do is pay attention to the notes in your chord progression, which is why we started with chord progressions. So our first chord, the root note, being a D sharp there. Next up, a C. We kind of follow that. We go D sharp to F. Cool, easy. We can remember that, and we're going to play it in along with our chord progression. Nothing too fancy here. Let's record in using the MIDI keyboard this time. Just following the chord progression. Great. So we've recorded in our notes, and we're probably a bit lower. Yeah, there it is. Just can scroll up and down the range of our instrument here. And we can see that we didn't quite make it to the end each time, which is fine. We could leave it like that to be a bit natural, but don't forget that we do have the ability to stretch notes. For bass line, I would say definitely avoid any notes overlapping. We're going to do the same thing we did for the other instrument, and we're going to add a sidechain compressor here. I'm going to stick with hard sidechain. You're going to hear this is going to make a big difference. A lot of times the bass and the kick can conflict, but when it's ducking under the kick from that sidechain, it doesn't have a chance to conflict. Some people don't like to sidechain their basses at all, or sidechain them a little bit less than other instruments, but you can adjust to your taste. Since that's a pretty solid section, let's go ahead and click on scene 2 and then click on this empty scene slot and copy it over so we can add another layer and build on our scenes. Let's add some type of melody here. For this, I'm going to go to the leads. And you know, lo-fi music tends to have this kind of video gamey retro vibe. So why not try to use this Game Boy lead here? I'll click and drag it so we get the new deck. This lead sound definitely does not have enough effects on it. It's definitely not wet enough. Now, I'm actually not going to use the filter in this way on this track, and we'll talk about why in a bit. But what I will do is add in my own filter here on the effects section. So if I go to EQ, we can actually add a low pass filter, which is accomplishing the same thing that that filter was. I think I can do without that reverb, so I'm going to swap it out for a sidechain compressor. Let's go back to sidechain, hard sidechain, turn that up. It's important to note too, for the sidechain, you can select the sidechain source from anywhere, any one of your decks. We're of course gonna take our signal from the kick. If we want to change octaves while we're playing on our keyboard, we can use Z and X. Z for octave down, X for octave up. Now, a lot of our synths have knobs called attack and release, so we can adjust the sound, the attack being that initial hit of the sound, right? Let's turn that up. We don't want it to be so extreme, but we can shave off some of that attack. And some have a glide function. You can hear, you don't hear those clean notes, you can hear them gliding between each other. And the more we turn that up, the more extreme it will be. The more we turn it down, the more subtle it'll be. I like to keep mine a little bit lower to be a little more subtle. Let's go ahead and record this melody. I'm actually going to turn quantize off because I want it to be a little bit off the grid. Now, I've got an idea for a new section, and it involves copying over this scene. So let's copy it over to a new scene slot. And for this particular scene, I want to drop the kick out. So I'm going to expand my drum deck here. And I'm going to go ahead and delete all my kick drums throughout. Let's get rid of all of these. We'll just leave the hi-hat and the clap for us to hear. So playing the scene. And I think we could add one more synth layer playing some chords. So let's go ahead under piano and strings, and we'll add this Atlanta synth here. I'm going to use the auto chord function again. We already know what chords we played, so it's easy to remember. 3 and 1. Let's go ahead and add our own low pass filter over this. So it's not so bright. We can add a reverb to this as well. You can experiment with the different types of reverb and see which one you like the most. And I'll bring the volume of that down a little bit. Let's go ahead and figure out the octave. I think this lower octave is better. And let's add this layer on top. Here we go. Great, I'm excited for that. Let's go ahead and duplicate this section one more time, and I want the drums to come back in. So let's actually add a slightly more active kick pattern for this scene 5 that we've just created. And I'm copying and pasting over my kick drum pattern. And I did that by holding Shift and selecting the kick notes and pasting them across. Command C and Command V. Great. We need to sidechain that synth though. So let's select our Atlanta synth again. Go ahead and add in the sidechain, hard sidechain. Let's crank that up. Something I want to do to scene 4 though. I actually want to automate this filter so that it will slowly come up as this section progresses over its 4 bars. Like this. I'm going to do it with my mouse. A very common filter effect. And we record that the same way we record notes, by clicking that record button and just adjusting the knob as we go. So I'm going to start down here at about -39. I'm going to hit record, count us in, and we will add in the filter. So let's do this. And you can see that it jumped right back down to -39. I'm going to turn record off because it recorded that automation. So now when it's time to transition to scene 5, which it will right after this finishes, I can default it back to 0 here on scene 5. But when I go back to scene 4, the automation, it remembers and it's recorded. And that's going to come in handy when we start building out our arrangement, which we will do after we add one more layer, which I just want to duplicate scene 5. And we're going to add a final layer, maybe some mallets, a little bit of a counter melody, something happening in the background. Yeah, that broken hourglass percussion sound sounds good. Let's make it work. Great. I'm going to filter these out a little bit. Maybe bring the octave up. Yes, there we go. Let's not forget about our sidechain. I'm applying this to all of our instruments now. And that simple 3-note pattern there, I think, is enough to add on top, just to give us a little something new in our final scene here. So I'm going to turn my quantize back on and record in this very simple pattern on top. Turn record off. And I'm pretty happy with all these layers that I have and these scenes that I've built. Now it's time to start thinking about arranging it. So we can go into our song view here. And it's actually already built us an intro with our intro section, which I believe is just chords and drums. I'm cool with that. After we finish that intro, I want to go to scene 2. So I'm going to click and drag and drop scene 2 right in there. Let's just progress through the track in order, actually. And now we've got a track that's about 1 minute and 20 seconds long that we could continue to arrange. Click this master button here and we can see our track in real time. So say I want to add this master compressor on our master effects here. As I start to dial that in a bit, I will see the effect that it has on the waveform. You'll see our levels start to level out as we add in that master compressor. If we'd like to go back to our scenes, we can click back to scenes and we can continue to either build up new scenes or use our old scenes to continue our arrangement. When you're ready and you're satisfied with your arrangement, you can go to File, export your song. You can export it just straight up as a wave, or you can export the stems individually. The stems being each individual layer of your track as their own audio file. Then you can even export each of the drum one-shots or the pads from the drum kit individually as well. All right, I hope that was a helpful video on how to create a lo-fi beat inside of Serato Studio. If you want to continue to learn about Serato Studio, we have more videos working in other genres and also explaining some musical concepts within this DAW as well. Thank you so much for watching. My name is Tetro for ADSR. Have a good one.